Hi, welcome back to the channel. It's Mark from Apprentice 1-to-1 and PowerSonic, and in this video I am going to cover a little bit about initial verification and periodic inspection reports, or as they are now called, EICRs, and the difference in those two things. And this is after a number of questions from apprentices to help with their inspection and testing, and there's videos all over YouTube already of people carrying out the various test processes for AM2 and other bits and pieces like that. So the IET have some videos up there, GSH and EFIX have stuff, Sparky Ninja's got stuff, Adrian Davey as well. So I'm not going to do another video kind of covering the same aspects, but in this one I want to talk about some of the theoretical side of it, if you like, and the clear difference between initial verification and your inspection reports. Sometimes people get mixed up. I mean, certainly when I first started off with the ICRs, or periodic inspection reports as they were called then, I was probably been too invasive in my inspections. You know, you've got to be mindful of the fact that you do need to perform a good visual inspection, but also without dismantling the entire thing. You know, there's always a risk that you could introduce danger in doing that wasn't there prior, because of time pressure. If you're in a domestic property, for example, and you take off all of the switches, sockets, accessories, light fittings, and everything and anything, to the point of inspecting every termination and connection and junction box that you can possibly find, you know, you're running out of time in the course of a day, and you end up rushing to try and put things back together, for example. So whilst you want a thorough inspection, you would use a sample basis for internal inspection of accessories and junction boxes, for example. And if you're finding issues and you get a general feel of the installation as well, that experience gives you, you know, you can expand that into a bigger intake of equipment and accessories. So, you know, you need to not get too bogged down in that. But anyway, we'll start with initial verification, and I've got the old guidance note 3 here. And this is a very unused copy because I've got these stretching back a long time, and read them over and over and over. There are some changes in the 18th edition version, specifically around the frequencies of inspection and testing, and how that they are just initial frequencies, and then the basis going forward is based on the inspector's recommendation that you put on your certificate. But anyway, it says about initial verification right at the start of chapter 2. Initial verification is carried out on a new installation before it's put into service, and the purpose is to confirm by the way of inspection and testing during construction and on completion that the installation complies with the design and construction aspects of BS 7671 insofar as is reasonably practicable. And you know, that's kind of saying really that you've got to check that the installation has been carried out in agreement with the regulations and the designer. And it says the inspector must have adequate information of the design details to check and inspect against. BS 7671 provides a format list in regulation 642.3 of items to be verified, but the list is not exhaustive. It then goes on to talk about different aspects of the inspection and verification process, and one of the key areas of it is to do with the initial inspection. It says here, regulation 641.1 requires inspection and testing to be carried out during the erection stage of the installation, and this is to allow the review and inspection of work that may later be covered over and inaccessible, but the inspector will require necessary design information from the designer before any such inspections during construction or installation. So if you're carrying out an initial verification on a new build house, for example, you need to see where those cables have been installed, that they are in zones, that they've had appropriate methods of fixing. It's not just a case of turning up and looking at it, you know, with a finished plasterboard on the surface. And you know, you can utilize photographs as well in your handover pack to the client, so you can show the cables, how they've been installed. You can show how the back boxes have been fixed even, and the fireproofing behind accessories. You know, it's an important thing to remember when you do an initial verification, that you do have to be mindful of that. And as the inspector, it's up to you to verify. It actually states, I mean, this is in guidance note 3, but it referenced the regulations as well, that the inspections are described in section 2.5 of this guidance note, and the relevant criteria for most part of the regulations are given in chapters 2 and 3 of the guidance note. So if you've got a copy of this, you know, well worth reading into if you carry out a lot of testing inspection on initial verification. And it says here that verification section, which is on page 18, the responsibility for comparing inspection and test results with the relevant criteria as required by regulation 641.3 lies with the party responsible for inspection and testing of the installation. This person, which may be the person carrying out the inspection and testing, should sign the inspection and testing section of the electrical installation certificate or declaration section on the minor electrical installation work certificate. If the person carrying out the inspection and testing has also been responsible for the design, he or she must also sign the design and construction sections of the electrical installation certificate. So it's basically telling you that if there's a few people involved, I mean on a new build especially, you're probably going to have different people carrying out the design and then the installation and then the testing, and if you're the person ultimately at the end of that chain doing the testing, you're the one taking responsibility for the inspection process. So keep in mind about seeing it through construction. And then with initial verification, it goes on to go through the full range of tests, so you have to perform all of the tests in full and on every circuit. So I mean, sometimes with your insulation resistance testing and with connected loads on a more complex installation, you're going to do line and neutral together to earth because it's not reasonable to disconnect every single load. But when you're carrying out initial verification, it would always be advisable to make sure that you're doing that. You know, you need to verify that you have good insulation resistance between line and neutral. So it's worthwhile getting on site during the construction stage before the final accessories are connected onto the circuit, and make sure you carry out that test. And we'll move on to the periodic inspection report, and chapter 2 of guidance note 3, as you'll see me flicking through these pages, is a big chapter. It's probably the biggest chapter in the book, and that kind of states the importance of initial verification. That's the setting point of any electrical system, so we give it a thorough and detailed initial verification. And then when you come to do your periodic inspection report, you can have an easier time of things. And periodic inspection and testing, as it's still called in chapter 3 of guidance note 3, which can be a little confusing because now we refer to electrical installation condition reports, and you know the terminology is not consistent. But anyway, that's what it's called, and it says right at the start, so this is chapter 3, page 81. The purpose of periodic inspection and testing is to provide an engineering view on whether or not the installation is in a satisfactory condition, where it can continue to be used safely. So as the inspector, you need to determine if that installation is safe to be put into use and continue to be used. And it says a detailed visual examination of the installation is required, together with appropriate tests. The tests are mainly to confirm that the disconnection times stated in chapter 41 are met. So that's making a key statement here, that in the inspection and testing process, you're verifying that disconnection times in the event of a fault can be met. So that's a primary statement right at the start of chapter 3. And you've got kind of 4 key aims that it lists here. So you're trying to make sure the safety of persons and livestock against the effects of electric shock, protection against damage to the property by fire and heat arising from an installation defect, confirmation that the installation is not damaged or deteriorated so far as to impair safety, and identification of installation defects and departures from the requirements of the regulations that may give rise to danger. So there are 4 key aspects. And it says here as well that for an installation that's under effective supervision in normal use, periodic inspection and testing may be replaced by an adequate regime of continuous monitoring and maintenance of the installation, and its constituent equipment by skilled persons competent in such work. So that's saying if you have a maintenance team within your building and they're carrying out effective maintenance of those premises, you maybe don't need to even carry out a periodic inspection report because it's been done on a continual basis. So we also have here that periodic inspection and testing is necessary because all electrical installations deteriorate due to a number of factors. And it goes on to list them and tells you about the legislation that requires electrical installations to be maintained, and the electricity at work regulations, and such. But I want to touch on this section here, which is 3.5, and it's routine checks. It says here that electrical installations should not be left without any attention for the periods of years that are normally allowed between formal inspections. So in domestic premises, it's presumed that an occupier will notice any breakages or excessive wear and arrange for precautions to be taken and repairs carried out. So this every 5 years or 10 years, whatever you're doing in whatever premises they are, that isn't the whole thing. You know, there's that continual process of monitoring an installation, and we do need to factor in that should be getting done. We all know that isn't the case in most situations, but it should be getting done. So the required information that an inspector should have when doing a periodic inspection report: it's essential that an inspector knows and agrees with the client the extent of the installation to be inspected and any criteria regarding the limit of the inspection. This should be recorded. Inquiries should be made to the person responsible for the electrical installation with regard to the provision of diagrams, design criteria, and the type of electricity supply and earthing arrangements. And on a larger install in commercial and industrial premises, you will usually have a pack that can give you that information, and that can help form your own report. In a lot of domestic premises, unless they've been looked after by social housing or good letting agents and landlords, often you're not going to have access to that. They just get lost in a filing cabinet somewhere. And hopefully, as we've moved into this time of electronic documentation, that'll be a thing of the past, and we'll all have access to these prior testing reports. That makes things easier. So the requirements for periodic inspection and testing, and again it states that point of an engineering view on whether an installation is satisfactory. And the periodic inspection and test comprises a detailed examination of the installation together with appropriate test. The inspection is carried out without taking apart or dismantling equipment as far as is possible. The tests made are mainly to confirm that disconnection times stated in Chapter 1 are met, as well as highlighting any other defects. So that's a clear statement there that you need to carry out an inspection to determine safety, but without dismantling equipment as far as is possible. So that's kind of leaning towards having an inspection process that can determine if it's safe, but without taking the whole thing apart. And in more simple installations in domestic premises, that's less of an issue, but on larger commercial installs, that's a key aspect. It's important that the competency of the skilled person carrying out the periodic inspection and test is of the appropriate level, having gained sufficient education, training, or practical skills and knowledge to be fully conversant with the type of installation being inspected. So that's basically saying that if you're carrying out an inspection on a premises, you need experience of maintaining, installing, and in testing of that particular premises. So if you're used to just domestic installs, for example, you wouldn't want to go off and be doing an inspection and test on a railway station, for example. So prior to carry out an inspection and test, the inspector will need to meet with the client or the client's representative to agree the scope and nature of the work. So that's just common sense, really, setting into plan what you're actually going to do and involving the client in that. So it says here about a general procedure, and it says the following advice is not applicable to domestic or simple installations, as the extent and method of inspection and testing is rudimentary in such installations in comparison with more complex installations. So this is, again, coming back to the difference between a domestic setting and a commercial industrial one. It says, although there are various approaches to carrying out inspection and testing, one suggested method is to first obtain an overview of the installation, ideally from diagrams and charts, as well as a simple walk around prior to starting the full inspection. This will enable the inspector to be able to plan and inspect and identify items that require isolation. So that's basically telling you to go and have a good look around, and that's a prime, fantastic piece of advice that I would give anybody doing inspection and testing. Before you even start with the detailed inspection and test, have a walk around, see how the building's been used, cast your eye over things, the circuit layouts. You get a feel of an installation before you start putting pressure on yourself with your schedule of inspections and your testing, because sometimes you can get a bit of tunnel vision with that. So have a good look around. And it says here, where diagrams, charts or tables are not available, a degree of exploratory work may be necessary so that the inspection and testing can be carried out safely. So that's the other thing you're looking at. Do you need access equipment? Do you need to be putting other PPE in place to carry out your inspections? What kind of switch gear and control gear have you got in there? During the inspection, an opportunity should be taken to identify dangers. So again, its dangers while you're carrying out the work, an important thing to keep in your mind. You can also set inspection and testing samples, and I did allude to that earlier on in this video, but the inspector must be familiar with setting both inspecting and testing sample sizes, as carrying out 100% inspection or testing in many installations is unrealistic, uneconomical and unachievable. So that's been stated in guidance note 3. You know, they're referencing the fact that in a large installation it's just not practical to inspect everything and to test everything in full, and that sampling is an accepted method of determining safety. But you should discuss sampling and sample size selection with the client as well, and make a you know, it says here that sample size selection generally simplifies and tend to be rather simplistic, and in practice matters are usually quite different. So that's saying there that we can say 10%, 20%, but often it's not the case. You need to kind of use your own engineering judgment to come to what you're going to take in to the inspection and testing, and using that to form an overall opinion of the installation. Should be noted that initial sample size is based only on a walk around and consultation of records. Further, that what may at first appear to be good, for example the quality of maintenance, may turn out to be poor during the detailed inspection and testing. So that's saying if you've looked at the records and it looks good, there's a good system of maintenance in place as far as you can see from the paperwork, but upon doing your sampled inspections and testing you're finding that that's not actually the case, then you need to increase that to take in a bigger view of the installation so you can determine what's safe and what isn't. It's using your engineering judgment again. And it says it again on page 93 about with the inspection of sample yields poor or unacceptable results, this would suggest that similar problems may exist elsewhere in uninspected items, and the inspector will then need to either increase the sampling or refer back to the client. So it's giving you that advice again in there, and it goes on to show you the schedule of inspections and kind of what you are looking through. I want to move on to the testing now, and it says here that periodic testing is supplementary to the inspection of the installation. So that's guidance note 3, telling you that the most important aspect of an EICR is the inspection phase. So you're going around and looking at all of the accessories. So you're taking every single accessory from an external point of view to check it's not damaged, that it's not deteriorated, that it's not worn, and that you would make a sampled inspection of internal connections as well. And the testing is supplementary. It says here that the same range and level of testing as for initial verification is not necessarily required or indeed possible. Installations that have been previously tested and for which there are comprehensive records of test results may not need the same degree of testing as installations for which no such records exist. So if you've got an installation with historical test results, and when you're carrying out your inspection and testing you're finding that the tests that you're carrying out kind of match up with that, you can use that knowledge to form an opinion on the installation without carrying out the full range of initial verification tests all over again. Periodic testing may cause danger if the correct procedures are not applied, and persons carrying out periodic testing must be competent in the use of instruments employed. So that's again referencing your competence and ability to carry out inspection and testing. It says here that the tests to be made, the tests considered appropriate by the person carrying out the inspection should be carried out in accordance with the recommendations in table 3.4 and considering sections 3.8.1 and 3.8.4 of this guidance note. So that's telling you there again to use your engineering judgment to decide what tests need to be performed on a periodic inspection report. It says here with the recommendations in this book that continuity of protective conductors, so that's accessible exposed conductive parts or current using equipment, is a recommended test. Continuity of bonding conductors, continuity of ring final conductors, and then you've got polarity tests, so at the origin, distribution boards, accessible sockets, outlets and extremities of radial circuits, earth fault loop impedance tests at the same points, insulation resistance tests, if tests are to be made, between live conductors connected together where applicable and earth at the main and final distribution boards. So that's saying there that it's an if. So if you are going to IR test, and again because of connected loads in a larger installation you can do line and neutral together to earth. So earth electrode resistance tests, and again it says if tests are to be made, test each earth electrode. And then your functional tests, so your manual operation of circuit breakers and RCDs. And it says where sampling is applied, the percentage used in the discretion of the inspector should be stated. on the certificate. It then goes on to describe some of the testing, so the continuity of protective earthening and bonding conductors, but the one that's a key aspect of a periodic inspection report, because it's the one test that will give you the most information as to the condition of the wiring system, is insulation resistance testing, in my opinion. And it says here, insulation resistance tests should be made on an electrically isolated circuit with electronic equipment which might be damaged by application of the test voltage disconnected, or only a measurement to protective earth made with the live conductors connected together. For most installations, the most practical test is an insulation resistance test between live conductors connected together and earth. In practice, time does not usually allow for a line to neutral test. So again, that's stating it in Guidance Note 3, and that's one of the key differences between initial verification and your periodic inspection report. And the results that you obtain for insulation resistance testing should be compared with previous results where possible, and then it tells you about the minimum values that you would expect to find on certain installations. It says here, where equipment is disconnected for these tests and the equipment has exposed conductive parts required by the regulations to be connected to protective bonding conductors, the insulation resistance between the exposed conductive parts and all live parts of the equipment should be measured separately and ought to comply with the requirements of the appropriate British standard for the equipment. It's another key aspect. And then it goes on to talk about your polarity testing and RCD testing, and then filling out of the actual form itself. There's another key part of this, and this comes in with experience again of the inspector and tester. So this is 3.12, page 105, and it says periodic inspection of installations constructed to earlier editions of the regs. And it actually speaks in more normal language than a lot of these books often do, but it says people often ask what standards should be applied when carrying out periodic inspection of an installation constructed in accordance with an earlier edition of the regulations. It says here that each edition of the wiring regulations provided for an increase of safety to the users of installations, and particular installation practices and methods that were compliant with earlier editions should be considered, which would be considered to be unacceptable now, such as the use of public water pipe as a means of earthing, which would be considered as potentially dangerous now. In all cases, the inspection should be carried out against the current edition of the regs. So when we're inspecting right now, it's to the 18th edition. And it's likely that there will be items that do not comply with that edition, but this does not necessarily mean that the installation is unsafe. If the inspector considers that an item, although not warranting a code C1 or C2, requires improvement, it should be given a code C3 on the electrical installation condition report. If the item does not require improvement, it does not need to be recorded as an observation. So that's telling you that you will find differences among the regulations, and some of the key ones I can think of, we mentioned there about the water pipe being used as the main earth, but you've also got the introduction of RCDs and the change from plastic consumer unit to metal. You've got your CPC on lighting circuits that wasn't a part of earlier editions of the regulations and now absolutely is. You know, there's other issues as well as we've moved along in time, and when you're coding, you need to be mindful of that in the approach you take, and that's a key aspect I try to get into people when they're going down this road of inspection and testing, and it's a really good route for electricians to push themselves towards as they develop their careers, is to trust your engineering judgment. You know, you're the inspector at the end of the day, you've done the training, you've gathered your experience, and use that to report in a way that you're comfortable with. You know, often we see these debates on social media about what code we should be using here and there, and they get quite heated, and there's other discussions about how we code effectively and such. At the end of the day, it's using your own confidence and your own ability, and reference the regulations that have not been met when you are coding. So use your engineering judgment. All about putting, well, it's my own opinion that we should be putting that confidence into people to do that effectively, rather than trying to create doubt and confusion and worry in people's minds. You know, it's an important area of the industry that we're doing initial verifications correctly, and that we're then carrying out effective maintenance and reporting on installations going forward. And we need a keen and motivated and confident workforce to do that. You know, again, you'll see oh, you know, how can you do an EICR for XYZ amount of money, or that all letting agents and landlords are just after the cheapest possible rate. And while that probably is true in a number of cases, in the majority it isn't. Most landlords and letting agents want to make sure that their properties are safe for people to occupy. And you know, if you can offer that service and do it in a professional way, so your reporting is clear, consistent, that you're prompt with your documentation, that you're able to quote effective remedial work, you'll set yourself apart and be busy all the time. You know, I work for a lot of letting agents and landlords, and they're off the scale sensational in the way they look after people, and the way that they carry out their testing and maintenance. And budget is never a discussion. You know, they get the value from us in being accurate, being consistent, and we get the value from them in having a steady flow of work and clients coming in all the time. You know, it works both ways, and you should never discredit or discount that section of the industry. You know, there seems to be a bit of a shame tag put on people who are working in that area at the moment. You know, and it's coming from a negative mindset, and I want to really raise positivity around that subject, and working in social housing and working in the private rental sector and carrying out those important inspection and tests, keeping people safe and understanding what the guidance notes. And again, this is just guidance. You can always work above guidance if you want to set yourself apart and carry out a full strip down of an installation and taking everything apart and giving yourself, I don't know, 2 or 3 days on a domestic property to do that thorough detailed job. Then you do that, you market yourself in that way and set yourself apart to clients that this is what you're doing every 5 years, and there might be a market for that. But ultimately as well, don't discredit people who are trying to effectively work to the guidance note and the regulations. You know, there's a lot of people out there who are just trying to make a living and do a good job, and you know, they're getting pulled down by others, and I don't like it. One of the other documents that is a good one, and when we're talking about the private rental sector, is this one from NAPIT. And again, if you're a landlord or a letting agent and you've stumbled onto this video and you're not sure what your legal responsibilities are, go and check this document out. If you're having an inspection done, if you're having an inspection done on your property, I've kind of run through the process that should be taking place. So you should be having a detailed inspection of all of the external accessories. There should be internal inspections to certain parts of the installations as well, depending on the premises. And again, a test process should be carried out, and you should be given a document to show you what's actually happened. And again, that document should, if it's domestic rented property, should be passed on to the occupiers. I think it's within 28 days, so you need to make sure that they're getting a copy of that as well. But it's all laid out in this book. It's not that expensive. See there's quite a few pages in it, and it gives clear guidance to landlords and electricians of what the responsibilities are. And the particular PRS rules came in last year, so I think it was June 2020, for any new rented tenanted properties, and any that are occupied need to be tested before the start or end of April. So if you're letting property at the minute and you've got tenants in there that you haven't had an electrical inspection condition report done on, you need to take effective action to get that in place, and it's well worth looking into. So I think I've rambled away there for long enough. I hope I gave a good overview of the difference between initial verification and periodic inspection and testing, and also the importance of carrying that out effectively in different environments, commercial and industrial, and the different approach to what you would perhaps find in a domestic property, and also the key aspect of not dismantling things to introduce danger, and how the guidance notes kind of guide you towards that. And just have confidence in yourself, believe in your own ability. Don't be drawn down by the debates on codes and questioning yourself all the time. If you want to learn some more yourself, there is the NAPIT Codebreakers Guide. The NIC have a guide as well. Reach out to people on social media. There's loads of people out there who'd be willing to offer experience and advice, me being one of them. I certainly don't know everything. I don't profess to know everything. I'm just doing the same most of the people out there today, trying to do a decent job and operate and work in my business in the best way I can. And ultimately, I hope some apprentices found that semi-useful, because that was the reason I produced this video, because I haven't seen anyone really talk in depth about the actual reasons we inspect and test, not just the practicalities of carrying out the testing. So anyway, catch you on the next one.